Hello everyone, welcome to SFC Markets and Finance. Rural revitalization is a key part of 2024 government work report. China has long been dedicated to boosting rural areas and improving the lives of rural residents. Over the past decade, significant progresses have been made in improving people's livelihood. How does rural revitalization make people's life better? From poverty alleviation to comprehensively promoting rural vitalization, what changes have occurred in China's countryside? How do these changes contribute to China's economic growth and prosperity? Today, we are pleased to welcome David Blair, U.S. Senior Economist and Vice President at the Center for China and Globalization, to share his insight with us. Hi, Ms. Blair. Thank you for joining us. We know you have been in China for many years. Could you share your feelings and experiences in China over the years and how you have witnessed the country's development and changes?
Unfortunately, I never came to China before about 2002. So I never really saw sort of the old China of the previous generation. I've talked to a lot of people that grew up during that time. And it was obviously a very different place. I visited mostly Beijing and Shanghai, short business trips during the 2000s. And then I came here for a year in 2013, and then I've lived here continuously since 2016. I think the main thing is what I call transformative growth. I mean, some countries get economic growth, you get rising GDP, but it doesn't really have a fundamental difference in the way people live. But what's happened in China, especially over the last 20 years and even the last 10 years, is people's lives have been transformed. I mean, it's a lot better, I think. And so the main thing about the growth is who cares about GDP statistics if people's lives have not been changed? And I think what I see is very fundamental changes.
You mentioned that people's lives has been transformed fundamentally. What are the main aspects of this?
I lived in Beijing for a good many years, but last 2 years I've lived in Yunnan province, a small city called Yuxi. It's not one of the tourist areas. And it's a small city, but there's agricultural land and mountains nearby, so I can go hiking around the mountains a lot. And I talk to farmers quite a lot as well as I can. And I have found them absolutely friendly people and very welcoming and warm, not only to me, but I think they are to each other. And so the transformation in the economic circumstances also changes people's psychology, I think. I think the term of what makes you happy, I think a lot of that has been achieved for a lot of people. In the 2000s, people in the West believed that, Beijing, Shanghai, maybe Guangzhou and Shenzhen are really getting developed, but the rest of China nothing's happening. That's just not true. I think it's good for a country not to have its wealth concentrated in a few small places among a few small group of people. It's good to see that wealth spread. And that's one of the things that really impresses me is how good people's daily lives are throughout everywhere I've been, including farmers. I think maybe one of the things that changed in the last 10 years is the improvement in lives of farmers. I guarantee you that, and they seem to live quite a nice lifestyle. So that's the thing that really impresses me is, it's one thing I think the country has done right. If I look at economics, there's one number I look at: median real wages. What's happened to wages? And wages went up very rapidly in China for the last 20 years. I mean, and that's been transformative to average people's lives. I always contrast that with in the US, wages, median real wages have been constant. They have not gone up a bit since 1979, and they've gone down 5 or 6% in the last 2 or 3 years. That's a big negative change in people's lives. I think people get meaning in their life from working and from making wages, and being sure that the average person can do that is a fundamental thing for any country.
What unique strengths of China's economy are reflected in the revitalization of the countryside? How do you think China will utilize these advantages to sustain economic growth in the future?
China has, in terms of purely economic model, and the problem they were trying to solve is, at the start, we're poor. How do we get the capital needed to lead to growth? I think there are a lot of things that I think China did right. I mean, I think the investment in infrastructure has been fundamental, because we were talking about spreading the capabilities around the country. Well, the fact that I can go to a small village in Yunnan or Guizhou or all the Western provinces, and there's not only a good road, but there's a nearby high-speed rail, and there's 5G, opens up a world of opportunities for the people in those areas. They know, if you talk to people here in Yunnan from 40 years ago, they didn't really know very much about the world. And now that's totally different. They can see opportunities, and they're taking advantage of it. People, I see people building very good small businesses that are keeping their family in good shape, and employing people. And so I think that's really important. One of the reasons that wages are not going up in the United States is increased monopolization of the economy. You're seeing, you look at just about any sector, it's becoming very small number of firms control it, and often they have a connection with the government that allows them to control it. And China has been more active at ensuring that markets work by enforcing antitrust law. And I think that's really been a crucial factor in ensuring that the people's wages go up. The company no longer has power over their workers, so they have to raise the wages. That's one lesson. And there are a lot of places that have built infrastructure, and it didn't work. I mean, it wasn't transformative. There's a road built, and then that road just falls apart within a few years. And that's because it wasn't the infrastructure wasn't accompanied by the economic reforms that allowed people to take advantage of the new infrastructure. But that's happened here. China has reached the point where infrastructure is now really, I think it's the best in the world. I don't think there's any other place that has the kind of sort of physical infrastructure, the roads and the railroads and the telecoms infrastructure. No, there's no, you look at Europe or the United States, the infrastructure is not nearly as good. The other thing that's going on in that regard is that Chinese manufacturing quality, in my opinion, has gone up a lot. And the foreign markets will consider it a threat. I'll hold it up. I just bought a Xiaomi phone yesterday. And the reason I bought it, I've been using Apple. I'm most interested in the camera. This is a much better camera than anything Apple's got. And I also own a Chinese car, a Geely, and it was half or maybe less than half the price of the equivalent of a European or North American product. And it's just as good. So I think the government's emphasis on dual circulation, grow exports, but realize they probably won't be growing as fast, and grow capabilities consumption around the country, around China. I think that makes a huge amount of sense to meet the current situation. I think if we can continue to see people's lives and sort of incomes increase throughout China, it's going to be a huge market for not only Chinese companies, but for everybody's companies. So sort of to summarize, I think China, the investments they made, especially the sort of the rural revitalization and the infrastructure investments, have been they were very smart and they were very crucial to achieving transformational growth. There's also been an emphasis on creating opportunities for people, creating, not only a few people in Beijing and Shanghai are innovative. You've got innovative people all around the country, and they think of little businesses that they not only feed their families, but they employ, 10, 15, 20 people. That makes a huge difference in people's lives. And I think that's the direction China has to go. It's, this sort of rural revitalization, innovation, and widespread innovation, very widespread innovation. And that kind of it, I can picture it being a very sort of beautiful economy 10 to 15 years from now.
Indeed. So the beautiful economy you pictured in 10 to 50 years from now, what will it be like? Will innovation and talent be the key words?
One of my favorite economists is a man named Edmund Phelps, who teaches at Columbia. And he wrote a book that was very influential in China called Mass Flourishing, 2013. And I think his main point is that people are not only happy, they feel productive. It's not only 10 people in Tsinghua University that are going to be transformative. It's people that might have, they might be 50 and they only got a middle school education, but they're smart. And they're going to think of things that transform people's lives. And that's just as big an innovation as you see out of laboratories, established laboratories. One of my favorite examples is the Wright brothers. They were bicycle mechanics with a high school education, and they invented the airplane. And there's that kind of spirit. And I think the thing China needs to be thinking about is how do you encourage the spirit of the people to do that kind of development? I can picture that China, the late 21st century, is going to be like one of the most beautiful economies you've ever seen.
As an economically developed region, how is Guangdong's performance in terms of technological innovation and talent attraction? What role do you see Guangdong playing in future development?
Well, I think Guangdong is an amazing place. But I want to push back a little bit about the word talent. I know talent here is usually used, it often means somebody that graduated from a top tier university with a PhD in something or other. There's a lot of other kind of talent. It's guys that went out and built little factories, innovated, very fast change, highly competitive market. And I think what's really crucial about Guangdong and some of the other Zhejiang and have a similar kind of situation is how fast they changed and how they integrated thinking about the technology with manufacturing. I think there was this crazy idea in U.S. business cycles. You don't have to manufacture anything. We just think up the ideas and we hire somebody else to do it. After a little while, you really don't know how to do anything. And what's so nice about Guangdong is they know how to do stuff. So I expect to see a lot of interesting stuff coming out of Guangdong.
China's secession is seen as an important demonstration of Chinese-style democracy. What do you see as the advantages of this mechanism in political decision-making and national governance?
Giving ideas about the way the future should work is important for people. One thing that really impresses me about the way governance works in China is that a lot of it's educational. I mean, I've been going around taking pictures of them. There are lots of photos on pictures or drawings on walls or slogans in Yuxi, and it's throughout China. You know, it's stuff like help the old ladies across the street, be clean, go to school, be productive, and there's some statues in a park here that show people massaging it's a statue of a young child massaging their grandmother's back, that kind of thing. And that's, some people might laugh at that, but I think it's very educational. That in the West, we wouldn't think that's governance. You got to get this regulator there and you got to watch them and that kind of stuff. But that teaches people things. I've talked to farmers here and he said, yeah, we heard that. We cleaned up our yard. That kind of thing. Or we put in new toilets and we've been sure the sewage is properly processed. That's important as a way of governance. I think where people are given, I don't even know the right word. It's sort of Confucian guidance from the top. This is a good way to live, and people think about it seriously. So that applies to, and that's sort of at a small level, but the guidance we will see at the two sessions is at a bigger level. And if the government says, man, we're going to continue allowing private sector to develop, we're going to continue the reform, and we're going to continue opening up for foreigners, that means something. Even if it doesn't exactly turn into regulations immediately, that local governments take that as a sense of direction. I think we're seeing, one thing I'm very disturbed about in my own country and in Europe is the increased influence of a highly moneyed and entrenched elite in trying to control democracy, so-called. I mean, there are elections, but I think we're seeing more and more control from a small elite in Western countries. And that disturbs me greatly. That's not the kind of world that I thought I was growing up in. And I think I'm not immersed in the Chinese political system. I'm a foreigner. I'm not directly involved with it. But from what I've seen, there seems to be a respect for average people, which I'm not seeing in North America or Western Europe now. I've had the opportunity of talking to quite a few mayors of cities around China. And that's the sort of the first thing they're thinking about is how do we improve the lives of average people? That's not what the mayors of big American cities are thinking about, I guarantee you. Saying everything's perfect. But the general direction, I think of, again, I'll say median real wages. Median means the average person. Does their wage go up? Do they have a good job? That's a good life. If you accomplish that, you've accomplished a lot. And if you don't accomplish that, you failed as a society. So anything that promotes that, I think is great. One more thing about that. I mean, I keep comparing what China's doing to what the West has been doing, especially the United States. And one of the reasons China has been so successful over the last 45 years is there hasn't been a war. And my country keeps getting involved in stupid wars, and it's been devastated. Not only the waste of resources, but it's increased the power of these entrenched groups I've talked about. It's caused terrible problems for the world. So I'm hoping that China can be a leader for peace in the world. A new type of international relations, I think, would be a big contribution, not only to China, but to the world.
Finally, could you share your prospect on China's future development, and how do you envision China's role on the global stage evolving?
I think China is at a transition period. And the Chinese economy is an economy. You're going to have slow periods, you're going to have fast periods. And right now, it's looking like China is in a slow period, but it's a slow period driven by the need to make this fundamental transformation I was talking about. Sort of the drivers of the past period, infrastructure investment, real estate investment, export growth, they're not available in the future. So China has to make a real change in its economy. And I think toward this sort of highly innovative, highly dispersed kind of growth, where you see growth bubbling up from the bottom all around the country. It'll be matched by big companies and by government investment and by scientific research, but that's the fundamental, is this sort of innovative mass flourishing. It won't be an easy transition, but they can be transformed. They can be transformative again. One thing that really excites me is I'm seeing schools built throughout. I mean, I see a lot of really nice schools here. And I think the new AI technology applied to schools could mean the next generation is really, really well educated, making that kind of really good education and also good healthcare available to everybody in the country. It should be, in my opinion, the next big government investment push. But I think they're already a good ways along that road. I mean, I think if China's 3 years behind in chips, catch up, eventually. You got a lot of smart people, they'll figure it out. So that's not really what worries me. What worries me is, don't buy into this US European system of encouraging subprime growth and extreme stimulus, and also extreme concentration of wealth that we've seen in the US and Western Europe over the last 30 years. Emphasize spreading the wealth. And by spreading the wealth, I mean creating opportunities for people and not allowing people to use monopolies to unfairly grab wealth. I think if China continues to succeed in doing that, it'll be very, very successful, could be very, very successful.
Thank you, Ms. Blair. As Ms. Blair highlighted, through rural revitalization and infrastructure development, people's living standards have been fundamentally improved. He truly believes China's future development is promising and confident that China will assume a greater role in the international community. That's all for today's show. Thank you for watching. See you.